The morning my daughter stopped speaking, the well had frozen solid, and I had to break it open with the back of an axe just to water the stock. That was the same week we buried her mother, and I have always thought the two things were one thing: the cold coming down out of the high country and into my house and into Lottie's small chest, freezing whatever it touched. I was 34 years old that winter, and I would have told you, if you'd asked, that my heart had gone down into the ground with my wife, and there was no part of me left that could ever thaw again. I was wrong about that, but it took a stranger walking out of a blizzard to prove it to me, and it took my daughter saying one word she had been holding inside her for a year, and I am old now, and I still cannot tell that part without my hands going unsteady. Her name was Bate, my wife. I will say it once and then mostly leave it, because a man can wear a name down to nothing if he says it too many times in his grief, and I learned to keep it like a coin in my pocket instead. She died of a fever that came on a Tuesday and took her by Friday, and there was nothing the doctor could do but stand in my doorway and look at his hat. We had been 7 years married. We had the ranch at Wolf Hollow, up in the Bridle Creek country where the wind comes off the snowfields in October and does not let up till May. And we had Lottie, who was 5 when her mother died and who, from the morning of the funeral on, did not say another word. She was not deaf. The doctor checked that first thing, clapping his hands behind her head, and she turned. She heard everything. She simply would not speak. She would nod or shake her head, she would point, she would do as she was told, but the sound had gone out of her the way the sound goes out of a house when the clock stops. I would catch her sometimes at the window, watching the road, and I knew she was watching it the way a body watches a road it expects somebody to come back down, and I did not have the heart to tell her that the dead do not come back down any road at all. I was no good to her. I will own that plain. I knew cattle and I knew weather and I knew how to mend a fence in a wind that would peel the skin off your knuckles, but I did not know how to braid a child's hair or what a little girl ought to eat or how to coax a word out of a mouth that had closed itself like a fist. I tried. God knows I tried in my clumsy way. But every time I looked at Lottie, I saw her mother in the set of her chin, and every time she looked at me, I think she saw a man who could not fix the one thing in the world that was broken. And so we drifted apart inside our own house like two boats let off the same dock, and the ranch began to go to pieces around us. By the second winter I was losing it. Not the land, I held the land, but the running of it. A ranch is 100 small things done right every day, and a grieving man does maybe 40 of them, and the rest pile up. The milk cow went dry from neglect. The garden had gone to weeds and frost. There was a leak in the bunkhouse roof I never patched, and it rotted a wall. I had 2 hired men in the good years, and now I had one, old Prout, who was past 60, and could not do the work of 3 the way I needed. And there was Lottie, 6 years old now, going to bed hungry some nights because her father had forgotten that supper was a thing that had to be made and not merely wished for. It was Prout who finally said it to me, one evening in the barn with the lantern between us. "Jonah," he said, "you got to get a woman in here, not for you, for the child. That little girl is being raised by wolves and you know it." I told him I was not in the market for a wife. "I didn't say a wife," he said. "I said a woman to keep the house and feed the child and put some warm in this place before it freezes the both of you to death from the inside. There's a difference, and you're too proud and too sad to see it." He was right, and I knew he was right, and it shamed me. And out of that shame I did the thing I had been too stubborn to do. I rode into Harlow's Crossing the next market day, and I paid the man at the freight office to put a notice in the papers that came up from the territory. A paragraph that said a widowed rancher in the Bridle Creek country wanted a respectable woman of good character to keep house and mind a young daughter, wages fair, room and board found. I felt like a fool writing it. I felt like I was advertising the size of my failure for strangers to read. But I rode home and I told myself it was for Lottie, and that part was true. The answers came slow, and most of them I could tell at a glance were no good. A couple of them were women looking less for work than for a husband with land, and one was a man's hand pretending to be a woman's, and the freight clerk and I had a laugh over that one. But there was a letter that came in late November, written in a plain hand with no flourishes, that said only this: that the writer was a widow of 28 years, that she could cook and clean and sew, and was not afraid of children or of cold or of hard work, that she asked for nothing but a fair wage and a roof, and that she would come the first week of December if I would have her. It was signed Della Mercer. There was no plea in it and no boasting in it. It read like a woman stating facts about a fence line. I do not know why that was the one I answered, except that everything else in my life that year had been either too much feeling or none at all, and here at last was a plain true thing. I wrote back that she could come. She came on the worst day of that whole December, which is how I should have known from the start that she was the kind of person who arrives in the teeth of a thing instead of waiting for it to pass. The stage from the territory only ran as far as Harlow's Crossing, and from there it was 11 miles up to Wolf Hollow over a road that the snow takes first and gives back last. The morning she was due, the sky came down gray and low, and by noon it was snowing, the kind of snow that does not fall so much as it is thrown sideways at you, and the wind got up under it until you could not see the barn from the porch. I told Prout there was no chance she'd come up in that she'd be holed up in town with good sense, and that I'd fetch her in 2 days when it cleared. It was full dark, near 8 o'clock, and the storm was howling fit to lift the roof, when something knocked at my door. I thought it was a branch. I thought it was the wind working a loose board. Then it came again, 3 slow knocks, deliberate, the knock of a hand and not of a storm, and I crossed that floor with my heart going strange, and I pulled the door open and the cold came in like a living thing, and there in the middle of it was a woman. She was so caked with snow that for a moment she did not look like a person at all, but like something the storm had built. Her shawl was frozen stiff. There was ice in her eyebrows and ice locking her lashes, and her lips had gone a color lips should not be, and she had a carpetbag in one hand with its handle frozen to her glove, and she stood there swaying and looked up at me out of a face the cold had scoured white, and she said, in a voice that barely had the strength left to make the words, "Mr. Calder, I'm Della Mercer. I believe you're expecting me. I have done some foolish things in my life, but I have never since done anything as foolish as the thing I did in that first half-second, which was nothing. I stood there. I gaped. A woman had walked 11 miles up a mountain in a blizzard that would have killed most men, and I stood in my warm doorway and stared at her like she was an apparition. And it was only when she swayed and put a hand to the frame to keep from going down that I came to my senses and got an arm around her and pulled her inside and kicked the door shut on the storm. "You walked," I said. "It was not a question. There was no horse, no wagon, nothing. From town you walked up here." "The stage couldn't make the grade," she said. Her teeth were going so hard she could barely get it out. "The driver turned back at the creek crossing. I didn't see the sense in turning back. You were expecting me today, and I said I'd come today." "You could have died." My voice came out rough. "You damn near did. Nobody walks that road in this. Nobody." She looked at me then, and even half frozen and barely standing there was something level in that look, something that took my measure and was not afraid of what it found. "I'm not nobody, Mr. Calder," she said, "and I'm here." And then her eyes rolled white and her knees went and she pitched forward, and I caught her before she hit the floor. What followed was the kind of night that strips the foolishness off a man. I am not a doctor, but I have pulled enough half-frozen calves out of enough drifts to know what cold does to a living body and how you fight it. I got her boots off and her frozen shawl off, and I wrapped her in every blanket in the house, and I built the fire up till it roared, and I heated stones in the coals and rolled them in flannel and packed them around her. And I sat by her through the dark hours, rubbing the life back into her hands and her feet. And somewhere in there Lottie came down the ladder from the loft in her nightgown, silent as ever, and stood at the edge of the firelight watching this stranger with her great solemn eyes. I told her to go back to bed. She did not go. She stood there a while, and then she went to the wood box and got 2 pieces of split pine without my telling her, and she put them on the fire, and then she sat down on the floor near the woman's feet and folded her small hands in her lap and kept watch with me. She had not done a thing of her own choosing in a year. I noticed that even then, in the middle of everything, the strangeness of it, that the arrival of this half-dead stranger had stirred something in my daughter that I had not been able to stir in all my fumbling. I did not know what to make of it. I filed it away. Toward morning the color came back into Della Mercer's face and her breathing steadied and she slept, real sleep and not the dangerous kind, and I sent Lottie up to her bed and this time she went, but slow, looking back. And I sat in my chair and watched the fire and the sleeping stranger and I felt, for the first time in a long while, less like a man frozen all the way through. Just a little less, just at the edges. She was up before me. I do not know how a woman who nearly died of cold the night before is up before the man of the house with the stove already going and coffee on. But when I came out at first light there she was, moving around my kitchen like she had lived in it 10 years, wrapped in one of my old coats with her own clothes drying by the fire, and she had found the flour and found the lard, and there was the smell of biscuits in the air, a smell that had not been in that house since bait, and it near brought me to my knees. "You ought to be in bed," I said. "I've never been any good at lying in bed," she said, not turning from the stove. "There's work and I'm well enough to do it. You take your coffee black, I expect. There wasn't any milk to speak of. Your cow's dry, you're feeding her wrong." I did not know what to say to that. It had been a long while since anyone had told me I was doing something wrong in my own house. Bait used to. I had forgotten how it felt, to be set straight by someone who had a right to. I sat down at my own table like a guest, and she put a plate in front of me, biscuits and what eggs there were, and I ate, and they were good, and I had not eaten anything good in a year, and I had to look hard at my plate so she would not see what it did to me. Lottie came down. Della had her plate ready before the child reached the bottom of the ladder. She set it down and she said, easy as anything, "Good morning." And she did not wait for an answer, and she did not look at the child like the child was a wounded bird, which is how everybody else in the world had taken to looking at her, and she did not try to coax or pet or pity. She just set the food down and turned back to her work as if Lottie were any ordinary girl on any ordinary morning. And I saw my daughter look up at the back of this stranger with a kind of careful attention I had not seen on her face since the funeral. That was the beginning of it, though I did not know it then. I thought I had hired a housekeeper. I did not know I had let the thaw in the door. She did not stay a stranger long, though she stayed a mystery a good while. Della Mercer was a worker the like of which I had not seen. Inside a week the house was a different place. The floors scrubbed, the leak in the bunkhouse found and patched with a competence that made old Prout take his hat off to her, the garden plot turned over and mulched against the spring, the dry cow brought back to milk by a feeding she changed without being asked twice. She did not chatter. She did not complain. She rose before light and worked till dark and asked for nothing. And when I tried, the first month, to pay her the wage we'd agreed, she took exactly what we had agreed and not a cent more, and she put it away in a tin she kept in her room, and I never saw her spend $1 of it on herself. I learned her story only in pieces, and only because the winter shuts a house in on itself, and you cannot live that close to a person for that long and learn nothing. She had been raised back east in a city, the daughter of a clerk. She had married young, a man named Mercer who had brought her west on the promise of land and prosperity, and the land had been poor and the prosperity a lie, and he had died of a chest sickness 3 years into it, leaving her a widow at 25 with no children and no money and a great deal of pride. She had kept herself since then on work, cooking in a boarding house, nursing the sick, sewing for other women's weddings. She had answered my notice. She told me once, because she was tired of cities and tired of crowds and wanted, she said, to be somewhere where the work meant something, where if I scrubbed a floor a child walked on it. Cities are full of work that doesn't mean anything to anybody. I asked her once why she'd never married again. She had a fine face and a steady way, and there must have been men enough. There were men enough, she said, and left it there, and I had the sense of her shutting a door, gently but all the way, and I did not push it. I had doors of my own. What I want to set down, though, what matters in all of this is the thing she did with Lottie, because it was a thing I could not have done in 1,000 years, and I think it was the truest kindness I ever watched one person do for another. She did not try to make my daughter talk. Everyone else had tried, the doctor, the preacher's wife, the women in town who clucked over her, even me. We had all of us tried to fix Lottie like she was a broken latch, and the trying had only driven her further down into her silence. Della did not try. Della simply talked to her all day long in an ordinary voice, the way you talk to anyone, and she never once seemed to notice or mind that no answer ever came back. She'd say, "I think we'll do the wash today, you and I," and she'd hand the child a basket, and the two of them would do the wash. She'd say, "Hold this end for me," and Lottie would hold the end. She gave the child 100 small things to do and 100 small choices to make, and she treated the silence not as a wound but as a fact, the way you'd treat a person's eye color, and slowly, I watched it happen over those weeks and could hardly believe it. Slowly my daughter came back up out of the deep place she'd gone. She did not speak, but she began to live again. She began to follow Della from room to room. She began to sleep through the night instead of waking with the terrors. She began, God help me, to laugh not out loud, never out loud, but I'd see it cross her face, a real child's laugh with the sound taken out of it, and it was like watching the first water move under river ice in March. And I will be honest, because there is no point in this telling otherwise, I began to thaw too, and I fought it like a drowning man fights the rope thrown to save him. It frightened me. I do not know how else to say it. For a year I had held my grief like a thing I owed to bait, like the keeping of it was the last loyalty left to me, and now there was warmth coming back into my house and into my chest, and it felt like a betrayal. I would catch myself looking forward to supper, to the lamplight and the talk and the smell of the cooking, and I would feel the guilt of it close over me, and I would go cold and short, and I would leave the table early and go out to the barn and stand in the dark among the animals where the warmth could not find me. I was unkind to her those weeks, not cruel, but hard, short. I'd find fault where there was none. I'd answer a kind word with a grunt. I was punishing her for the crime of bringing my house back to life, and she knew it, and she bore it, and she did not give me an inch of the satisfaction of an argument. Until one night she did. It was January, the dead heart of it. We'd had a week of weather that kept us all penned indoors, and the closeness of it had worn on me, and that evening I'd snapped at her over nothing, the placement of a chair, I think, or the time of the supper. And I'd seen Lottie flinch at my tone, and that had made me angrier still at myself most of all, and I'd shoved back from the table and gone for the door. And Della Mercer's voice stopped me with my hand on the latch. "Mr. Calder," she said, "a word, if you please, outside." We went out onto the porch into the cold. She pulled the door shut behind her so the child would not hear. She stood there in the lamplight from the window with her arms wrapped around herself against the chill, and she looked at me, and she was not afraid. "I have held my tongue near 2 months," she said, "because it is not my place and because a grieving man is owed a wide berth. But I'll hold it no longer because there's a child in that house and I'll not watch you do to her what you're doing." She took a breath. "You think your sorrow honors your wife. It doesn't. It's just sorrow. And every time you turn cold at that table, that little girl learns again that warmth is a dangerous thing in this house, that if she lets herself be happy her father will go to ice in front of her. You're teaching her to be afraid of her own gladness. You're teaching her that the safe thing is to feel nothing." Her voice had not risen. It was level and quiet, and it cut all the deeper for it. "I have buried a husband, Mr. Calder. I know what it is. But the dead are not honored by the living going into the ground after them. They are honored by the living staying alive. And you are the only parent that child has left, and you are barely there, and I am telling you to your face that it is past time you came back." I do not know what I expected. To be angry, maybe. I had a right to be angry. She was a hired woman speaking to her employer in a way no hired woman had a right to speak. But the anger did not come. What came instead, standing on that frozen porch with the stars hard and bright over the snowfields and this plain, brave woman looking at me with the truth in her face, was a thing I had not let myself feel in a year, which was the simple, unbearable weight of how much I had lost and how badly I had handled the losing. And I, a grown man, a rancher who had not wept at his own wife's grave. I put my hand over my eyes and I wept on that porch like a child. And Della Mercer did not touch me and did not say a soft word. She only stood there with me in the cold and let me do it, which was exactly the right thing and the only thing, and I have loved her for it every day since. When it was done, I wiped my face on my sleeve and I felt scoured out and clean in a way I had not felt in a long time. "You're right," I said. "God forgive me. You're right." "I usually am," she said, and there was the ghost of something in her voice, not quite warmth and not quite humor, but the place where both of them start. And we went back inside and I crossed the room and I knelt down by my daughter's chair and I took her small cold hand in my two big rough ones and I said, "I'm sorry, Lottie. Your papa's been a long way off. I'm coming back now. I promise you." And she looked at me and she did not speak, but she put her other hand on top of mine, very gently, the way you gentle a spooked horse, and I understood that I was forgiven, and that the forgiving had been waiting on me all along. After that it was better. After that the house was a home again, or near enough that you could call it one without lying. I came to supper and I stayed at supper. I let myself laugh. I let myself watch Della at her work and feel glad of it. I took Lottie up before me on the horse when I rode the fence line, and I taught her the names of the hills the way my father had taught me, and though she never answered, I knew she was listening, and that was enough. The three of us settled into a kind of life. We did not name it. I did not let myself look at it too closely for fear of frightening it off. But it was there, and it was good, and I had not thought to have anything good again. Then the winter, which had been hard all along, turned killing. The blizzard came down on us the first week of February with no more warning than a dropping glass and a strange green color in the western sky, and it was the worst I had seen in 20 years in that country. The wind came first, then the snow on the back of it, and by the time I had the stock into the barn, and the doors barred, it was a whiteout so complete that I lost my own porch rail twice crossing from house to barn and back. We fortayed up. We had wood and food, and we had each other, and a storm, even a bad one, is a thing you wait out. I have waited out 100 of them. I was not afraid. I should have been watching the child. It was Prute's fault and mine and nobody's. He had a dog, old Prute did, a half-blind cattle dog named Shep that Lottie had taken to over the winter. It was one of the things that had come back to her, the loving of that dog. And in the confusion of getting the stock in, the dog had been left out, and somewhere in the long howling afternoon Lottie had understood that Shep was still out in it, and she had not been able to tell anyone because she had no words, and so she had done the only thing she could think to do, which was to go and get him herself. We did not even know she was gone. That is the thing that wakes me still, the worst of it. We did not know. Della was at the stove and I was mending tack by the fire, and we both of us thought the child was up in her loft, and it was a full half-hour, maybe more, before Della went to call her down for supper and found the loft empty and the small coat gone from its peg by the door. I have never known fear like the fear of that moment. A child, 6 years old, out in a blizzard that was killing full-grown cattle where they stood. The cold alone would take her in minutes. I was through the door before I had my own coat fastened, bawling her name into a wind that swallowed the sound a foot from my mouth, and there was nothing, just the white roaring void where the world had been. "Jonah," Della had come out after me, and she had her wits where I had lost mine. She grabbed my arm and put her mouth to my ear to be heard. "The dog. She's gone after the dog, Prute's dog. It sleeps in the linta by the south fence. When it's not let in, she'll have gone there. It's the only place she knows to look. Jonah, the rope, get the rope. We'll lose each other else." She was right. She was right about all of it. I got the long lead rope from the barn, and I tied one end to the porch post and the other around my waist, and Della took hold of the rope behind me, and we went out into it together, the two of us, paying out that rope foot by foot into the white, beating our way toward the south fence with the wind trying to tear us off the face of the earth. I do not know how long it took. It felt like hours. It was perhaps 15 minutes. We followed the line of the buried fence by feel, my hand on the top wire, and we came at last to the lean-to, a black shape barely darker than the white, and I tore the door of it open. And there in the straw, half frozen and curled around old Shep with her arms locked tight about his neck, was my daughter. She was alive. She was so cold she could not stand, and her lips were blue, and she had stopped shivering, which any man of that country knows is the worst sign there is, the body giving up the fight. But she was alive. I got her up against my chest inside my coat, and I felt her cold cheek against my neck, and I have never in my life held anything the way I held that child. And Shep, that old half-blind dog, he came too, because she would not let go of him and I would not make her. And the four of us turned and followed that rope back out of the storm hand over hand, Della and me, the child between us, the dog at our heels, and we came out of the white at last into the lamplight of my own door like swimmers coming up out of deep water. Inside, by the fire, we worked over her the way we'd worked over Della 2 months before, the blankets, the heated stones, the chafing of the small cold hands. Della was steady as iron through all of it, and I was not. I was shaking too hard to be of much use, and so it was Della who held my daughter and rubbed the life back into her and talked to her low and steady all the while. There now, you're home, you're safe. We've got you. Your papa's got you, and I've got you there now." And slowly the shivering came back, which is a good sign, the body taking up the fight again. And slowly the color crept back into Lottie's face, and her eyes came open and found Della's face above her in the firelight. And my daughter, who had not spoken a single word in over a year, who had gone silent at her mother's grave and stayed silent through everything, through her own father's coldness, through the long dark winters, through nearly freezing to death in a linta with a dog in her arms. My daughter looked up into the face of the woman who had come walking up a mountain through a blizzard to take care of her. The woman who had just gone back out into another blizzard to save her life, and she opened her mouth, and in a small, cracked, rusty voice, the voice of a thing long unused, she said one word. She said, "Stay." I do not have the words for what that did to the room. Della went absolutely still. Her face, I will not try to describe her face. And then her eyes filled and spilled over, and she gathered that child up against her and rocked her and said, "Yes, yes, child. Yes, I'll stay. I'll stay as long as you want me. I'm not going anywhere." And Lottie said it again, "Stay." And then a third time, "Stay." Like she had a year of silence to make up and was starting with the one word that mattered most. And I knelt there on the floor of my own house with my hand pressed over my mouth, and I understood that the ice had broken, all of it, everywhere, all at once, in the child, in the woman, in me, and that the long winter of my heart was over. She did not stop talking after that. Not all at once, it came back slow, a word at a time, the way a creek comes back after a long freeze, a trickle and then a flow, but it came back. And within a month my daughter was a chattering 6-year-old who would talk the ear off a fence post. And the strangeness of the house after a year of silence was not the quiet any more, but the lovely, ordinary noise of a child's voice in the rooms, and I never once tired of it. I never have. She is grown now with children of her own, and her voice still goes straight to the soft part of me, because there were days I thought I would never hear it again. But I have got ahead of myself. There was still the matter of Della Mercer, and the matter of my own heart, which had thawed past the point where I could pretend any longer that what I felt for her was the ordinary regard of a man for a good housekeeper. I knew what it was. I had felt it once before in my life, and I knew its name. And it frightened me near as bad as the grief had, because I did not see how a woman like that could feel the same for a hard, graying widower, 11 miles up a mountain with a half-wild daughter and a ranch that was only just climbing back from ruin. And because I did not know how to court a woman a second time at my age. And most of all because I was afraid that if I spoke and was wrong, I would lose her, that she would feel she had to go, and the house would go silent again, and I could not have borne it. So I said nothing, and the winter turned toward spring, and the matter might have hung there unspoken a good while longer if it had not been for Royce Talbot. Talbot ran the big outfit down in the valley, the Bar T, and he had wanted my water for years. Wolf Hollow sits on the head of Bridle Creek, and whoever holds the head of a creek in that dry country holds the lifeblood of everything below it, and Talbot had been after me to sell since before Bate died. He had offered fair once and then less than fair, and when I would not sell at all he had taken to other methods, a fence cut here, a few head of my cattle that wandered onto his range and never wandered back, a word dropped in town that the Calder place was finished, that the widower had let it go to ruin, and the bank would have it before the year was out. There was just enough truth in that last part, after my bad year, to make it bite. And that spring, when I rode into Harlow's Crossing to see about the note I owed at the bank, I learned that Talbot had been there before me, and had quietly bought up my paper, and now held the debt himself. He came up to the ranch to tell me so in person, which was like him. He sat his fine horse in my yard and did not get down, and he told me, smiling, that he held my note now, and that it came due in the fall, and that we both knew I could not pay it after the winter I'd had, and that he was prepared to be generous. He'd forgive the debt entire in exchange for the deed to Wolf Hollow, and I could take my daughter and my hired woman and go start fresh somewhere a man wasn't in over his head. He made it sound like a kindness. He was a man who had a gift for making the taking of a thing sound like the giving of it. I will tell you what I felt hearing that was not despair. A year before it would have been despair. But I had a child who talked now and a house with warmth in it and a woman in it I loved. And the strange thing about having something to lose is that it does not make you weaker, the way I'd always feared it would. It makes you harder to move. I told Royce Talbot that I would have his money in the fall, every cent of it, and that he could keep his generosity, and that he was sitting his horse on my land and I would thank him to take it off. He laughed and rode away. But I had no idea, saying it, how I would make good on it. I only knew I would. It was Della who showed me how. That night at supper I laid it all out for her, the whole of it, the note and Talbot and the size of the debt, because she was part of the house now and had a right to know, and because, I will say it plain, because I had got into the habit of telling her things, of wanting to know what she thought, which is its own kind of love and maybe the truest kind. And she listened the way she listened to everything, all the way to the end without interrupting, and then she got up and went to her room and came back with the tin. The tin where she had put every dollar of her wages, untouched, all winter long. "It's not enough by itself," she said, setting it on the table. "I know that, but it's a start, and I've been thinking." And then she laid out a plan, plain and practical, the way she laid out everything, that the high meadows of Wolf Hollow were the best summer grass in the country, and that other small outfits, the ones too little to stand against Talbot alone, would pay to graze their stock up there through the dry months, that with the creek in our hands we could ask a fair price, and they'd be glad to pay it, and glad too of a Calder who'd stand against the Bar T when they were too small to stand alone. That between the grazing money and a good calf crop and her wages, and the hard work of all of us, we could meet that note by fall and have Talbot's smile wiped off his face for good. It was a good plan. It was a plan I would never have thought of in the black tunnel I'd been living in, because it was a plan that depended on neighbors and on trust, and on the future being worth working toward, and I had not believed in any of those things for a long time. "Why," I said, my voice came out strange, "why would you put up everything you've saved, every dollar, against my debt? You owe me nothing. You could walk away from this clean." She looked at me across the table for a long moment, and Lottie looked between the two of us with those bright knowing eyes children get, and then Della said very quietly, "Because it's not your debt anymore, Jonah. Somewhere this winter it stopped being your house and your child and your trouble. I don't know exactly when, but it's ours now. At least in here, for the first and only time I ever saw it, Della Mercer's steadiness wavered, and a flush came up in her face, and she dropped her eyes to the table. At least, I had come to think of it that way. I'm sorry if I've presumed. And there it was, the door she'd kept shut all winter, swung open the smallest crack, and I was not such a fool as to let that crack close again. I got up from my side of the table and I went around to hers and I took her work-roughened hand in mine, and Lottie watched us with her breath held, and I said, Della Mercer, I did not hire a housekeeper. I know that now. I think I knew it the night you walked up that mountain. I don't have much to offer that isn't mortgaged to a man I hate, and I'm older than you and harder than I ought to be, and I've been a poor excuse for everything this past year. But I love you. I have for a while and been too afraid to say it. And I'm asking you not to stay on as a hired woman, but to stay on as my wife, if you'll have a man like me. Will you marry me, Della? She did not answer right away. That was like her too. She would not give a thing as serious as that an instant less weight than it was owed. She looked at me, and she looked at Lottie, and something passed over her face, and then she said, I have one condition. Name it. That you understand I am not marrying you because I have nowhere else to go, she said, and her voice was fierce all of a sudden, and her chin came up. I have somewhere else to go. I have always had somewhere else to go. I came here free and I have stayed here free, and if I marry you it will be because I choose to, because I want this child and this hard country and this stubborn grieving man who is finally done grieving, and not because I am a poor widow with no other roof. I'll not be taken in like a stray. I'm marrying you with my eyes open and of my own will, or I'm not marrying you at all. Do you understand me? I understand you, I said. I'd have it no other way. I never wanted to take you in, Della. I want you to stay because you choose to. Then yes, she said. Then I'll marry you, Jonah Calder, God help us both. And the fierceness went out of her face and the warmth came into it. The warmth that had been thawing my house all winter, and I kissed her there in the kitchen with my daughter clapping and laughing out loud, the sound of it filling the rooms and old Shep barking at the noise, and it was, I think, the single best moment of my whole long life. We were married in the spring, in the little church at Harlow's Crossing, with the snow gone off the hills at last and the creek running high and bright with the melt. Lottie carried the flowers. The whole valley came, even the small outfits Della had been right about, the ones who'd take our high grass that summer and stand with us against the bar tea. They came in their wagons to see the Calder widower wed again, and to see the little girl who'd come back from her silence. And there was not a dry eye in the place when Lottie stood up at the front and said, clear as a bell so the whole church could hear, That's my mama now, and pointed at Della. She'd chosen her, you see. She'd chosen her from the first night by the fire before any of the rest of us caught up. Children know. They always know first. We met Talbot's note that fall, every cent, and laid it down on the banker's desk in coin and bills, and I am told Royce Talbot did not smile for a week. We held Wolf Hollow. We hold it still, or rather my Lottie's eldest holds it now, for I am too old to do more than sit on the porch and watch the high meadows green up in the spring. Della and I had 2 more children after we married, both of them loud as a brass band from the day they were born, as if the house were making up for that long silent year all at once. We had 31 years together before she passed, my Della, and I will not pretend the losing of her was not hard, because it was the hardest thing. But it was a different kind of hard than the first time. The first time, I went down into the cold with my grief and tried to die there. This time I knew better. This time I knew, because she had taught me, standing on a frozen porch under hard bright stars, that the dead are honored by the living staying alive. And so I have stayed alive, and I have been glad, and I have told my grandchildren the story of the night the stranger came up the mountain through the blizzard, the night the ice broke, the night a half-frozen little girl with a dog in her arms looked up into the face of the woman who'd come to save us all, and said the only word that ever mattered. She said, stay. And she did.